Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to North Point Geographic Solutions Geospatial Lunch and Learn today. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're at. We appreciate you taking the time to tune in today. If you could make sure you're on mute, that would be great. And if you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to drop them in the chat. And if Cray misses them during the webinar, we'll make sure that they get answered at the end. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Cray.
All right, sounds good. So Craig Freestone, I'm a GIS developer at North Point Geographic Solutions, and we're going to go over extending Survey123 with JavaScript. So this lunch and learn is going to assume some basic background of Survey123 Connect. We won't be using the sort of web user interface of this. We're going to be using Connect, and you know, some understanding of JavaScript can be helpful, but it should hopefully be pretty accessible to just get started after this. So, so I can keep this to hopefully around 30 minutes. I'll just start right now. Right here we have Survey123 Connect, and I'm just going to start with a new survey, and I'm just going to call it Demo Simple. And I'm just going to choose the advanced template, which may or may not sound intimidating, but it comes with all the features that we need. So I'm going to create the survey, and what we'll do is it'll open up an Excel file. If it doesn't, okay, there we go. And it'll also open up a preview of what this looks like. So anything that you change here on the left-hand side should correspond to what's going on over here. So I could just change this to hello, and once I save it, it'll do all of the Survey123 magic, and it'll change what's going on over here. So in order to actually use JavaScript for this, what we're going to need to do is go into the files for the Survey123 that we created. All of your Survey123 is kept in a My Survey Designs folder. I'll have to go to New folder and create one called Scripts. It has to be called Scripts. I believe it has to be lowercase. So I'm going to be opening this up in Visual Studio Code, so I can create some files in there and open it up on my other screen. So just one second. And I'm going to create a new file called hello.js. And so here's where we can write our JavaScript. So I'm actually going to go back to the demo, and I'll do a simple example where if someone enters their name in, it'll print their name back out. Doesn't have a lot of utility, but should hopefully drive through some concepts. So right here is where someone's going to be able to enter their name. Just going to delete that. And I'm going to create a calculate type. This is where the JavaScript, this is where Survey123 will be able to talk to our JavaScript file. So you have to give a name, which sort of corresponds to what a field name would be in ArcGIS Online or in a geodatabase. And label is what would be the equivalent of an alias. So I'm just going to call this calculate hello. And in order to actually call JavaScript from Survey123, hopefully that's still somewhat readable. Let me actually maybe make this a little smaller. Make this one bigger so it's not too smushed. Okay. So we'll want to go to the calculation column, and we have access to a lot of arcade functions in Survey123. So one of them is called pull data, and it takes a various amount of arguments to that function. So we have pull data here. You can use this to pull data from a CSV. You can use it to pull data from a GeoPoint, JSON. In this instance, we're going to be using it for JavaScript. So the first parameter is at JavaScript. So it knows what to be pulling. And the second one, we're going to say what the name of our file is. So hello.js. And the second and third one is going to be our function. The function that we will be calling is going to be, why not name it hello? And then the fourth argument to this is going to be the first argument to that function. In this instance, it is going to be user name, which is, as you can see over here, the name right here. In order to call fields in Survey123, you have to do $, brackets, and then the name of the field, so it knows where to find it. This isn't making sense right now. That's totally fine because we haven't actually written our function yet. So we have to go in here and create our function hello, and we'll have to put in that argument 1. And really what we'll want to do is send back a message that says hello plus argument 1, which, and then we'll want to return that message. So again, this is the hello function. And then this is argument 1 is username. So I'm just going to save that. It's going to think real hard about this one. And, oh, I realized what I did. So it's doing the calculation right now, but calculate isn't going to automatically show up on the screen. What you have to do is actually make a note of it. You can put it in another text field. In this instance, I'm just going to put it in a note. And for the label, you can just set it to what your calculation was. So now it should actually show up there. Property hello. And sometimes you might just get a an error. That instance. Going to do some quick troubleshooting. Oh, I think I know what's going on. Okay, so there we go. There's just a little typo in there. You'll notice right away, I haven't typed anything in here yet for enter your name, but it's already spitting out hello. The JavaScript here doesn't know to actually stop if there isn't an argument. So what it's doing right now is still turning hello plus that null value. So it's doing hello, but if I enter the name in there, it should return hello Cray. If you ever run into something where you don't want it to run until there is an argument, you could always add in something like if there is no argument, then just return. Don't do anything. And then that way, once you update it, it should just be blank until you actually put in a value there. So yeah, now we can see that nothing is there, but now hello Dolly. Now this is obviously doesn't have a lot of function to it, but the reason I bring this up is because this function hello can be something that's more complex. In this instance, I could have accomplished this through Arcade just by doing some concatenation between hello plus username. But if you have really complicated formulas or algorithms that you want to put in here that would become too verbose or just impossible to write in one Excel cell, then you can put it in your JavaScript. So I'm just going to copy paste this function. It's the Haversine formula. It just it takes the distance between two latitudes and longitudes and spits it out in, this is going to be kilometers. So this specific function is going to return the distance between whatever I input and whatever the distance is to Maui. So I'm going to save that here. And now that we have the function in there, we have to actually call it. So important part of this is going to be, it's going to be a geopoint question. So for those who don't know, you can add geopoints, which allows user to capture their location. So by default, it'll be in the red lens, but you can change that in Survey123 and it'll put it there. And you can also get the X and Y data from the geopoint question itself using the pull data function. In this instance, I'm going to be using pull data at geopoint. And what that's going to do is look for that location. That's the field name. It says, give me the X, give me the Y. And then we're going to feed that into our JavaScript function. So, computer's giving me a little bit of grief right now. All right. Okay. So we have the calc distance, and we're calling JavaScript hello.js. Did not change between the two. It's still the same JavaScript file. We're going to call the Haversine function, and the Haversine function takes two arguments. It's going to take that X and that Y. And so if I go back in here, it is taking those arguments, and if there's no arguments, don't do anything. But if there is, go through all these steps, calculate it out, and return the value. So if you remember from earlier, if I save right here, it would do all the calculations, but wouldn't actually spit out anything. We have to put that in a note or a text field. So in this instance, I'm going to create a note. Just call it, I don't think I actually have to give it a name because it's not going anywhere. Call it calc. What do we name it? Calc distance. And then once I save that, based on where I select on the map, it should give me my distance to Maui. All right, so Redlands about 9,000 kilometers from Maui. And just to show that I didn't hard code that in there, I will change it to, where am I? Put it in Minnesota, which is 12,000 kilometers from Maui. So again, not exactly the most practical use case, but really get you thinking about what sort of things that you could put in there that maybe are too complicated to put in a calculation cell. Another great thing, I'm going to exit out of this one, about having the ability to use JavaScript within Survey123 is that you can make calls to external APIs. So this one we can call demo weather. And we are going to call the weather API to get weather based off of location. So, going to delete some of this stuff out of here. Going to use a geopoint question. Going to calculate the X and the Y. We'll save that just to see it update. And then we will want to, and apologies that this is going a little fast, but I figured people didn't want to see me type all of it out. So, right here, we got our two geopoint pulling the X and Y, and we got our JavaScript looking for weather.js file, which we don't have yet, a function called weather, and it's taking in that X and that Y as their arguments. So we'll have to go into our files, create a folder called scripts, open up that folder, and create a file called JS. And so create this, takes two arguments, the X and the Y. And so something about the JavaScript in here is that you can't use things like jQuery, you can't use any external frameworks, you kind of have to do everything in vanilla JavaScript. So in order to make a request to the Open Weather Map API, you have to create a new XML HTTP request object. Our URL that we're going to be making the request to, just going to copy, is going to be Open Weather Map. We're going to specify units as imperial. You can specify them as metric. It defaults to Kelvin, and I don't know why. So make sure to specify the units that you want. Your latitude and your longitude will be in there, as well as your API key. So we'll actually want to send that, we'll want to get that URL, and we're going to do get URL. And then we're going to actually send that request. We're going to get that response. And then we are going to return a JSON string of what that response was. I actually need to put the API key in here, which I'm just going to change after this webinar. So I don't really know how much harm you can do with this API key, and I would encourage you to do no harm with it. So we got our function already in there, and just going to go back to our Excel form, and I'm going to put some descriptors in here. So I'm storing the result of that calculation in something called my JSON. And then this way, I don't have to make a request in the JavaScript just to create different functions under weather for what's the weather description, what's the temperature, what's the real feel, what's the wind speed. I don't have to create a bunch of different functions in my JavaScript file to do all that. What I can do is just store it into JSON. And then you can use pull data at JSON to extract all that information. So at JSON, okay, where's your JSON? It is my JSON. And then from there, I can start extracting information from there. So there's a description, the temperature, the real feel, and the wind speed based on my location. So I'll save that, let it refresh. And we'll start again in Redlands. Or it actually might be using my location. So we're in Grand Rapids, Michigan. From there, it should be populating some of the data, but it is actually possible that the API key is expired. In that instance, I have a backup, so that's fine. This is the exact same code, possibly a different API key in here. So same thing, enter the location. Once your map loads. Redlands now. And it will pull in all that information. Want to emphasize that's the exact same code, Excel file thing. I believe it was just an API key mishap. So clear skies, 56 degrees. I'm sure it's a lot nicer than what's going on in Duluth, Minnesota. Check that. And 22 degrees. Wow, let's be at 24. And overcast. So that's an example of weather API. This one becomes a bit more practical. Say you have a form that you need to fill out when you're flying a drone and you need to record the weather, or any inspection that's occurring outside that the weather needs to be recorded for that day. This is a good sort of implementation you can use, so they don't have to be the inspectors or pilots or anything like that don't have to worry about getting the information each time. So it can be pretty helpful. And for the last survey, going to look at actually getting data from your ArcGIS Online data. So I was going to make use of ArcRest. I'm going to close out of this and close. Oh, wait, yeah, that's the one I want. Oh, whew. Thought my computer died for a second. All right, so I see we're getting near 12:30, so I'm going to get through this. So I am going to copy paste some of this, but I'm going to go over what's going on in this form. And it might throw some errors because there's not actually any JavaScript ready, and it's going to be looking for some JavaScript. So, but basically, it's an inspection form that is looking for what is the inspection date. It is going over some wells in an area. So I can actually show a quick idea of what's going on here. I'm only going to show part of it now because I'm going to go over some of this later. But it is some wells that I made, and each one of the wells has an inspection associated with it, gathering the gallons per minute. And from each one of these, it will launch Survey123 for you. So yeah, once it actually converts that Survey123 form. So in the meantime, we can start creating our JavaScript form. So scripts. And open that up. Sorry, my computer is really thinking about this one. All right. Create a new file, and this time I think I'm just calling it ArcGIS.js. And from there's a bit more code going on in here, but it's still relatively straightforward. So the main function that we have to worry about here is get data. The rest of these just kind of help out with making it work. And so what we're doing here is creating a new XML HTTP request, going to the URL of that well feature service. So those wells live in all the inspections live in a related table of those triangles you saw earlier. And I'm trying to find where the parent global ID is equal to the parent global ID. And you have to pass in a token to get that to work. So those are the two arguments here. And basically from there, I am just extracting data. The two things that I'm trying to return is what is the most recent gallons per minute recorded there at a specific well, and then what is the average of the gallons per minute at a specific well. And then I'm returning that over here. So I get to, yeah, maybe I need to restart that. But that doesn't stop me from going over what's going on in here. So pull data. I am using the get global unique ID from the well ID. And so that JavaScript function is basically saying, you know, if I select well 1, return this global ID, well 2, return this global ID, well 3, return this global ID. And then it is plugging that into this JavaScript formula. So the parent global ID, and then what is the token. So there's another pull data function called property, and it lets you get the token from where you're logged in at ArcGIS Online. So it'll make much more sense when I can actually get a loaded. Right. There's a choices list that it's looking for. I'm just gonna put that over there. Done. Survey123. Yeah. Okay. It's a calculation. computer just seemed to shut down Survey123 there. So let me pull up the example that seems to be working, because it doesn't seem to like this one very much. Apologies about that. So well, in this instance, I am glad I recorded a GIF ahead of time, so I'm just going to show the functionality of that. And what the GIF is going to show is me opening up the web map in ArcGIS Field Maps, which is the new kid on the block. It's the new field app that is supposed to, down the line, I think by the end of this year, replace it's going to replace Collector and Explorer. And I think even down the line, Workforce is going to be implemented into field maps. What's going to do is click on that well ID, and through a custom URL scheme is going to open up Survey123. It's going to pass in that parent global ID, and it is also going to pass in, I believe, that well ID, and it's going to populate that information. And again, that most recent information we're pulling in was the most recent value for gallons per minute, and it's going to show what the average value. And I even have something in here. Okay, yeah. So yeah, recent, average. It's going to show the difference between what the inspector put in there and then what the most recent value actually is. And so that recent value, and that's could be a good workflow for inspectors out there, because, like, let's say that difference between what was most recently gathered there and what is being gathered there now is wildly different. Could alert the inspector that something strange is going on, or that they perhaps put in the wrong values there. And that could be based off of the average or just what they're putting in. But at any rate, I'm going to show the GIF. So we're opening up field maps. It's just going to go straight to the web map that I have in ArcGIS Online. Just looking around at the wells with gallons per minute gathered at each one of them. And I think what this is going to do is select well 2. So we should expect well 2 to show up in the Survey123 form, which it does. It pulls the average, the most recent value. I'm going to put in the most recent value, or this value, and it'll show the difference of 13.8 near the end. So this could be a really handy tool for assisting people out in the field. Really, the only limit to this is pretty much your imagination and some of the limitations that Esri does actually have out there, which are, as I mentioned earlier, you can't use frameworks like jQuery. You can only use vanilla JavaScript. You can't access local files. You can't put this in a public form. So if you wanted to share something with the public, it wouldn't be able to use JavaScript functions. If you absolutely need to access an API out in the field, you have to make sure that you have internet connectivity. Kind of goes without saying. If you do have a JavaScript function that just does a bunch of complex calculations, as long as when that survey is submitted, once it's finally synced and submits to ArcGIS Online, it will honor those calculations. And also, you can only use these within the same organization that you're making these JavaScript functions in. I've never tested it with a shared group between 2 different organizations before, but according to Esri's documentation, it can only happen within the same organization. So thank you for joining today's Geospatial Lunch and Learn. we have time, we can do questions.
It looks like there was one question in the chat that Jesse answered. It was just how do calls to external APIs work in offline mode?
Yeah, yep. So yeah, that probably won't happen if you need that information right as it's happening. I believe once the data does get synced up, any of those calculations that do need to make a call to an external API will be honored. But if you need it right in the moment and you don't have any internet connectivity, then that's not going to work out.
All right, any other final questions? Looks like there's maybe a hand raise. Tony.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Tony.
Yeah, so I was wondering, can you run calculations on like previously submitted data? So say you submitted like 5 plots, can you run through those plots and run like calculations based on like an ID?
Yeah, I think you could easily modify this query to be, instead of it being your global ID, you could say where type equals lift station or manhole or something like that, or the manhole ID like MH-1, and then sort of either take, either loop through all of them and perform a calculation based on all those records, which is kind of what it's doing here, is taking the average of everything that is well ID number 1 or 2 or 3. So definitely possible. Cool.
All right, any other final questions? Otherwise, if you think of something later, feel free to jot down Cray's email address or our general information email address at Northpoint and shoot over any questions that you may have later. So thanks again for tuning in today. Any feedback is always welcome, and we hope you have a great day.